Late autumn pressed down on the empty flats near the New Mexico line with the weight of something waiting to break. The land stretched wide and merciless, all hard-packed earth and low scrub that bent under a wind carrying the first bite of winter. That was exactly why Naichi had chosen this place. 3 years since the raid that killed her husband and scattered her band. 3 years of waking alone in a hide tent, checking snares, keeping her fire small. 3 years of surviving in silence that either broke a person or forged them into something harder than rock. She had become the latter. The afternoon sun hung low when she knelt beside the narrow creek rinsing wild onions. The water bit cold at her fingers. Her hair fell in a thick braid over one shoulder tied with buckskin strips. The beadwork across her vest was simple earth tones that matched the land. She looked like she belonged here, like she'd grown from the dirt itself. The first wrong sound came as a low scraping. Not a deer, not wind, something heavier. Human. Naichi's hand froze. Her spine straightened as her eyes tracked upstream. A man staggered into view around the bend. He moved like something already broken. One arm clutched against his ribs, his steps uneven. His shirt hung dark with dried blood. His face was shadowed beneath a crooked hat, but even from 30 yards she could see the gray pallor of his skin. He took 3 more steps before his legs gave out entirely. Naichi rose slowly, hand finding the knife at her belt. She approached in a wide arc, scanning for tracks. One set, just his, no pursuit visible. She stopped 5 feet away and watched his chest rise and fall in shallow movements. His eyes were closed. The wound at his ribs had bled freely, a gash maybe 6 inches long, ragged like a blade had torn through flesh. No gunshot, a knife. She should leave him. The thought came cold and clear. She didn't know this man, didn't know what trouble followed his trail. Getting involved meant risk, and risk meant death. But her hand was already reaching for his neck, checking his pulse, thready and fast, his skin fever warm. She checked his pockets, his belt, finding nothing. No weapons, just the clothes on his back and blood soaking through them. This man wasn't her husband. This man was nothing to her. But he was still breathing, and somehow that was enough. Naichi hooked her arms under his shoulders and pulled. The weight nearly took her down. Her boots slid in loose dirt as she dragged him inch by painful inch toward her tent. By the time she reached it, sweat had collected at her temples, despite the cold. She lowered him onto blankets near her fire pit, then moved quickly. Water first warming it before soaking clean cloth. The blood came away, slowly revealing the cut beneath. Deep enough to worry, but not fatal if treated. She packed it with yarrow and sage, wrapped his ribs with cloth strips. Only when finished did she truly look at his face. Lines carved deep around his eyes told stories she couldn't read. A scar traced white along his jawline. Not a stranger to violence. She trickled water between his lips. Most ran down his chin, but some went down his throat, working weakly. She tried again, patient until he'd taken enough. Then she sat back and studied him in the growing darkness. She didn't know his name, didn't know if saving him was the smartest thing she'd done in months or the biggest mistake of her life. But he was here now, breathing steady in the warmth of her fire, and she was still here watching over him. Morning came gray and cold. Naichi had dozed twice during the night, her hand on the knife beside her blanket. The stranger shifted in uneasy sleep, his breathing hitching with pain. She stepped outside and scanned the flats. Nothing moved but ravens circling to the east. No dust on the ridges. The creek ran clear and steady. Inside, the man's eyes were open now, staring at the hide ceiling with unfocused gaze. He turned his head when she entered. His voice was rough, barely a whisper. "Where am I?" Naichi crouched near the fire, keeping distance between them. "My camp. You collapsed by the creek yesterday." He blinked, processing, then tried to push upright. Pain seized his face and he fell back with a bitten curse. His hand found the bandages and stilled. "You did this. You were bleeding." Long pause. His eyes tracked the tent's interior, herbs hanging in bundles, baskets, clay pots. Simple. Sparse. "How long have I been out?" "Since yesterday afternoon, maybe 18 hours. He nodded slightly. "I need to ask you something." "Ask." "Did anyone follow me here?" Naichi's jaw tightened, so there was trouble. "I found your tracks, only yours. But if someone came after, they might have followed without leaving clear sign." His eyes closed briefly. I need to leave. I can't bring them here. You can't walk. Then I'll crawl. He tried again to sit up, got slightly farther before his body refused. When he settled back, defeat lined his mouth. Naichi poured water and held it out. He took it with trembling hands, pride and necessity, warring before necessity, won. What's your name? He considered whether to answer. Wade. Wade Brennan. I'm Naichi. He repeated it once, getting the pronunciation right. That marked him as someone who'd spent time around her people. Thank you for pulling me out of the dirt. She didn't respond. Thanks were just words. You said they. How many? Wade's expression darkened. 3 that I saw. Could be more by now. What do they want? Something I wouldn't give them. That's not an answer. His jaw worked. I had a horse. Good one. They wanted it. I said no. Things got ugly. Naichi glanced at the knife wound. That's not from a fist fight. Never said it was. Silence stretched. She could push for the whole story, but everyone on these empty flats was running from something. The details mattered less than whether pursuit would find them before Wade could walk. She moved to the entrance, lifting the flap. Everything looked as it should, which meant nothing. Can you describe them? Leader's name is Pike. Big man scarred up like he's made violence his career. The other 2 are younger, meaner. How far behind when you lost them? Half a day, maybe. I kept moving through the night, tried to lose them in the hills north of here. Naichi let the flap fall. If they find this camp, they won't care that you're wounded. I know. And they won't care that I'm Apache. They'll see me as an obstacle or an opportunity. Wade met her eyes. That's why I need to leave. She studied him, this stranger who'd stumbled into her isolation and threatened to shatter it. Part of her wanted to help him leave, let him become someone else's problem. But the larger part remembered what it felt like to lose everything and keep breathing anyway. Remembered her husband's last words about honor and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. You can't walk, she said, her voice flat with decision. And I won't drag you unconscious across 20 miles so 3 men with knives can finish you somewhere else. Then what do you suggest? I suggest you stay quiet and heal. And I suggest we both hope your Pike is worse at tracking than you think. Wade's expression shifted, surprise and wariness mixing. Why would you risk that? Naichi fed another branch to the fire. Because you're here and you're breathing, and that's enough. It wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was tangled in grief and guilt, in the particular loneliness of being the last of your family standing. But it was true enough. Wade was quiet for a long time. I won't forget this. You don't need to remember it. You just need to heal fast. The day passed in watchful quiet. Wade slept fitfully. Naichi ranged around camp, checking for tracks, finding none. By evening, Wade woke with better color, managing to eat dried meat she forced on him. As darkness fell, he spoke suddenly. I had a brother. Naichi glanced at him, but didn't interrupt. Younger by 5 years. Name was Daniel. He was better than me at everything that mattered. Smarter. Kinder. Wade paused. Last year, we worked a ranch north of Santa Fe. Owner owed us wages but kept putting us off. One night, the owner's son came drunk and started trouble with Daniel. I wasn't there. By the time I got back, Daniel was dead. Knife to the gut. The son claimed self-defense and the law believed him. What happened to the son? Wade's expression went cold. Nothing. Law protected him. I couldn't. Is that why you're out here? From myself, I guess. From the fact that staying near that ranch meant I'd do something stupid without bringing Daniel back. He looked at her. I'm telling you this so you understand. I'm not worth what you're risking. Naichi sat quiet, then spoke. My husband died 3 years ago. Wade's attention sharpened. There was a raid. White men from the settlement. They'd been pushing onto our land for months. One night we decided to push back. Small raid, just enough to make them think twice. Her hands tightened. They knew we were coming. Someone sold us out. They were waiting with rifles. My husband took 3 bullets before I could reach him. Died in my arms while the others retreated. The rain hammered against the tent. I came here because everywhere else reminded me of him. Out here, it's just land and sky and staying alive. Nothing to remember, nothing to regret. She met Wade's eyes. So when you say you're not worth the risk, understand that I know what you're carrying, and I chose to carry it with you anyway. Wade held her gaze, something passing between them, recognition. Like two people walking parallel paths through grief, suddenly finding they'd ended up in the same place. "Thank you," he said finally, and the words carried more weight than they had any right to. The storm raged through the night. Dawn came without violence, just more rain. By mid-morning, Naichi ventured out to check the area. The ground had turned to mud, every print filling with water. If anyone had come during the night, the evidence was gone. The storm broke by midday. Naichi stepped outside and scanned the horizon. Northeast, southwest. Nothing moved. Then she saw them. 3 riders on the eastern ridge, maybe 2 miles out. Searching, methodical, working in a line that would eventually bring them toward her position. She turned and went back inside quickly. Wade looked up, reading her expression, before she said a word. "They're here." He tried to stand immediately, got halfway before his body betrayed him. Frustration crossed his face. "How many?" "3. 2 miles east, moving this way. They're searching, not riding straight, so we have time." "How much time?" "An hour if they steady on pattern. Maybe 2 if we're lucky." Wade steadied himself against the center pole. "You need to leave. Take what you can carry and go west. I'll stay, slow them down if they find the tent." Naichi looked at him with something like exasperation. "You can barely stand. You're not slowing down anything." "Then what do you suggest?" She moved to her pack and pulled out the bow, checking the string. 12 arrows. Not ideal, but enough if she was careful. "I suggest we make them think twice about coming closer." Wade had the pistol out now, though his hands shook. He met her eyes. "I don't like this." "You don't have to like it." She moved to the tent flap and looked at the distant riders. They'd spread out, covering more ground, still working the same direction. The storm had erased Wade's trail, but fresh prints would stand out once someone made them, staying hidden until they passed, or making sure they never got close enough to find the tent. Naichi made her decision. "I'm going out there, going to lead them away from this position." "No." Wade's voice was flat. "I don't understand, and I won't let you do this. This is my land, my choice, my fight if it comes to that." They stared at each other, wills locked. Finally, Wade looked away, jaw tight. "If you get killed doing this, then you'll know I died protecting something that mattered." She took the bow and knife and stepped out into the bright afternoon. The riders were closer now. She watched their pattern, then started moving not toward them, but leaving a trail clear enough to follow. After 100 yards, she circled back west, staying in open ground where tracks showed plain. Then she found position among rocks that gave good sight lines and cover. She nocked an arrow and waited. The riders took 20 minutes to reach the tracks. She saw the moment they spotted them, the way the lead man Pike raised a hand and the others converged. They studied the ground, then looked in the direction the tracks led, toward where Naichi waited away from the tent. They remounted and followed, moving carefully, weapons drawn. Naichi let them come. 80 yards, 60, 40. At 30 yards, she stood up, bow drawn, arrow aimed at Pike's center mass. "That's far enough." All 3 froze. Hands went to guns but didn't draw. Pike stared at her, eyes narrowed. "You're Apache, and you're trespassing. This is open territory." "Not anymore." Tension hung thick. Naichi kept the bow-drawn eyes moving between the 3 men. "We're hunting a man," Pike said carefully. "Came through here yesterday wounded. You seen him?" "I see many things. Most I keep to myself." "He's a thief. Stole something valuable." "Funny. He said you tried to kill him over a horse." Pike's expression shifted, surprise and anger. "He told you that?" "He told me enough." One of the younger men shifted. "Pike, maybe we should—" "Shut up." Pike's attention never left Naichi. "Where is he?" Gone." "You're lying." Naichi adjusted her aim. "Test that theory and find out." Nobody moved. The afternoon sun beat down. In the distance, a hawk screamed. Then Pike smiled, cold and ugly. "You're protecting him, which means he's close. Many tents in these flats, most empty. Then you won't mind if we check." He started to turn his horse. Naichi shifted aim to the animal's head. "Take one more step, and I put an arrow through your horse's eye. Then the next one goes through yours." Pike froze. The smile was gone. "You really want to die for some drifter you don't even know? I want you off my land. Whether that happens peacefully or with 3 bodies left for coyotes is your choice." She saw it happen, the shift from calculation to decision. Pike's hand moved toward his gun. Naichi's fingers released the bowstring. The arrow took the younger man to Pike's left in the shoulder, spinning him sideways with a scream. The other two scattered, diving off horses, scrambling for cover. Naichi was already moving, knocking another arrow using terrain like she'd been born to it. A gunshot cracked behind her. Another shot closer. She dropped behind a ridge and came up 30 feet from where they'd seen her last bow drawn. Pike and the remaining man had taken cover behind their horses. The wounded one was on the ground, clutching his shoulder and cursing. "You just made a big mistake," Pike shouted. Naichi didn't answer. She waited, watching for movement. The standoff stretched, neither side willing to move first. Then Pike tried something stupid. He grabbed the wounded man's horse and slapped it hard, sending it running toward Naichi's position. Using the chaos as cover, he sprinted behind it. Naichi tracked his movement through the dust and released. The arrow caught Pike in the thigh, dropping him mid-stride with a howl. He hit the ground hard, gun flying from his grip. The third man saw both his companions down and made the smart choice. He broke for his horse, mounted, and kicked it into a gallop, heading east at full speed. Naichi kept her bow trained on Pike as she approached. He'd propped himself against a rock, hand clamped around the arrow shaft, face twisted with pain and fury. "You're dead," he hissed. "When word gets out, word won't get out, because you're going to take your friend there and ride away. And if I ever see you on this land again, I'll finish what I started." She stepped closer. "The man you're hunting, he's under my protection now. Spread that word if you want, or keep quiet and nurse your wounds. But if you come back, if you send others, you'll regret it more than you regret anything else in your miserable life." Pike stared with pure hatred, but underneath she saw fear. Recognition that he'd underestimated her badly. The wounded man had reached his horse and was trying to mount with one working arm. Pike dragged himself upright, testing his leg. Mounting took 3 tries, clearly agony, but he got himself into the saddle. He looked down at Naichi one last time, memorizing her face. Then he turned the horse and followed east, moving slowly. Naichi watched until they were specks on the horizon. Only then did she lower the bow. Her hands shook now, adrenaline catching up. She'd fought before, but this was different. This was choosing violence, but Wade was safe. That's what mattered. She retrieved her arrows and started back. By the time she reached the tent, dusk was gathering. Wade was waiting inside the entrance, standing with one hand braced against the pole, his face tight with concern that shifted to relief when he saw her. "I heard shots. They found the tracks, came looking. I sent them away." He took in the bow, the empty spots and her quiver blood on her arm that wasn't hers. "You're hurt." "Not mine, theirs. 2 wounded, 1 ran. They won't be back tonight." Wade's legs gave out, exhaustion and relief dropping him onto the blankets. Naichi moved to check his bandages, finding them secure. "You should have run," he said quietly. "I did what needed doing." "You could have died." She met his eyes. "So could you, but we're both still here, so I'd say it worked out fine." They held each other's gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Recognition that they'd crossed a line together. "Thank you" doesn't come close to covering it. Then don't say it, just heal. By full dark, Wade had drifted into sleep. Naichi stayed awake, bow across her knees, watching and listening. The sounds were normal, wind distant, coyotes the creek. Nothing suggested Pike had doubled back, but she'd learned that safety was temporary, so she kept watch through the night, eyes burning but refusing to close. For the first time in 3 years, Naichi wasn't facing the darkness entirely alone. Morning came with clarity that felt almost cruel. The sky stretched blue and infinite. Naichi had slept maybe 2 hours total. Her body ached from holding tension, but they were alive. Wade woke as the sun cleared the ridge, his eyes opening slowly. He studied her before speaking. "You look like hell." "Good morning to you too." He pushed himself to sitting, moving with less pain than yesterday. Progress. The fever had broken sometime during the night. "Did you sleep at all?" "Some." "How much is some enough?" Wade didn't push. Instead, he accepted water and drank slowly. "We need to talk about what happens next." Naichi fed the fire. "You need another week before you can travel any real distance. Maybe more. I can manage on less. You can try and tear open everything I've sewn together, or you can be smart." His jaw tightened with frustration, but he didn't argue. "Pike will come back. Maybe. Maybe he learned his lesson. Men like Pike don't learn, they escalate. Nietzsche weighed this. Pike had looked at her with hatred, the particular hatred of someone beaten by someone he considered beneath him. That kind of blow to pride festered, demanded retribution. If he comes back, he'll bring more men. Yes. Then we should move, today if possible. Wade shifted, testing his strength, managed to get to his knees before pain stopped him cold. He sat back heavily. Or maybe in 3 days, he admitted. You pushed too hard yesterday. You set yourself back. I wasn't going to lie there helpless while you fought my fight. It stopped being just your fight the moment they stepped onto my land. They locked eyes, neither backing down. Finally, Wade looked away. I'm sorry. The word surprised her. For what? For bringing this here, for putting you in danger, for every consequence that's coming from yesterday. Nietzsche was quiet, then told him the truth. I've been alone for 3 years, safe, hidden, invisible, and I was dying that way slowly enough that I could pretend I wasn't. You stumbling into my camp, half dead, that woke something up I thought I'd buried. Wade's expression shifted. What did it wake up? The part that still wants to fight, still wants to matter, still thinks there's a reason to survive beyond just surviving. She moved to the tent flap. We have 3 days, maybe 4 if we're lucky, and Pike's wound slows him. We use that time to get you strong enough to ride, gather supplies, scout a route west into the hills. You've already decided we're leaving together. You have somewhere else to be. Wade didn't answer, which was answer enough. Where will we go? There's a place I know. 3 days ride west, maybe 4 with you healing. Old Apache camp in high country near water protected by terrain. No one's used it in years. We can make it work through winter. We. She turned back to face him. Unless you'd prefer to go your own way once you're healed. No, the word came quick and certain. No, I wouldn't prefer that. Something settled between them, understanding that went beyond shared danger. They were choosing each other deliberately. Nietzsche moved back to the fire and began preparing food. All right, we find another way. They spent the morning in practical work. Nietzsche checked Wade's wound, changed bandages, satisfied herself that infection hadn't set in. Then she went out to scout while he rested. The blood from yesterday's fight had dried to dark stains. She studied the ground carefully. Pike had ridden east, both moving slowly. No circle back, no additional tracks. But that would change. Men like Pike didn't absorb losses quietly. She spent 2 hours ranging in circles, checking sight lines, mapping routes away from this position. To the west, land rose toward the Mogollon Mountains. The old camp she'd mentioned sat in a canyon protected on 3 sides. It would work. When she returned, Wade had managed to stand and was moving in slow circles, testing his balance. How far did you get? Around the tent twice. Feels like I climbed a mountain. Sit down before you fall down. He complied. His breathing was labored but steadying. The effort had cost him, but not as much as yesterday. The area's clear, Nietzsche said. No sign of Pike, but we need to assume that's temporary. Agreed. She began sorting his supplies, food, water containers, weapons, basic tools, medicine. Everything else was weight they couldn't afford. Wade watched her work. I can help with that, Ian. You can rest. I've been resting for 2 days. Let me do something useful. She considered refusing, but recognized the look on his face. Pride was fragile in injured men. She handed him leather strips and cordage. Sort these. Separate strong from frayed. We'll need good rope for the journey. He took the pile and got to work. They sat in companionable silence, both focused on tasks. Wade broke the quiet. Tell me about the place we're going. Nietzsche tied off a bundle before answering. Canyon of the Painted Walls. Apache name means where the ancestors left their stories. There are pictographs on the rock faces, old ones from before the Spanish came. My grandmother took me there when I was young, showed me the springs, taught me which plants grew there. Your grandmother was a healer, a medicine woman. She knew things mostly forgotten now, how to read the land, how to listen to what the earth was saying. She died before the reservation, back when we could still move freely. Wade heard the weight in those words. My grandmother was like that too. Used to say the land would take care of you if you paid attention. She was right. Silence, this one carrying something warmer. Shared understanding. How long since you've been to the canyon? Wade asked. 5 years before I married, before everything changed. Will it still be there unchanged? The land doesn't change the way people do. The springs will still flow. The walls will still hold the old stories. Whether we can make a life there is the question. Wade tested a piece of rope. We'll make it work. The certainty in his voice surprised her. Not bravado, just simple statement of intent. The day passed in that rhythm. Small tasks accomplished gradual preparation. Wade's strength building increment by increment. By afternoon, he could walk the tent's length without stopping, could lift his arms above shoulders with only moderate pain. Naichi went out twice more to check the perimeter, each time finding nothing alarming. But she'd learned not to trust quiet. As evening approached, she began preparing a larger meal. They'd need calories for the journey ahead. She roasted a rabbit she'd snared, adding wild herbs and the last onions. They ate as light faded, neither speaking much. The fire burned down to coals. Darkness pressed close. Naichi broke the silence. I need to know something. Wade looked up. I don't know. That story about your brother, about the rancher's son, was that the whole truth? His expression went still careful. Why would you doubt it? Because men don't usually run from guilt unless there's more to it. Wade set aside the bone he'd been cleaning. You want to know if I killed him? I want to know who I'm traveling with. He stared into the fire shadows deepening. When he spoke, his voice was low. I thought about it, planned it, spent weeks watching his routine, bought a knife specifically for the job. Then one night I was ready, had him lined up alone in the stable. I stepped out with the knife and he saw me, knew immediately why I was there. Just looked at me and said, do it then, but it won't bring him back. Wade's hands clenched, and I couldn't. Stood there forever, knife raised, but I couldn't make myself move, because he was right. Killing him wouldn't bring Daniel back, would just make me a murderer. So what did you do? Walked away, left the ranch that night, been moving ever since, trying to outrun the fact that I'm a coward who couldn't even avenge his own brother. Naichi absorbed this. You think not killing him makes you a coward. Doesn't it? I think it makes you human. Revenge feels necessary until you're faced with actually taking it. Then you realize it's just more death, and the weight crushes everything underneath. Wade looked at her sharply. You sound like you know that firsthand. I do. She fed the fire another branch. After the raid, I tracked the men who led it. Took 3 months, but I found them. 5 men camped in an arroyo. I could have killed them all while they slept. Had my bow had the rage. I stood over the leader with an arrow nocked, ready to put it through his eye. And I realized killing him wouldn't bring my husband back. Would just add my soul to the pile of broken things violence had created. So I walked away, came here, chose survival over revenge. Do you regret it? Every single day, but I don't regret being able to live with myself. Wade was quiet, processing. So we're both cowards then? Or we're both smart enough to know some lines can't be uncrossed? They sat with that, the fire crackling between them. Eventually, Wade spoke again. When we get to this canyon, when we've made it through whatever's coming, I want to build something. Not just shelter, but an actual home. Something permanent. Naichi studied his face. That's a good dream. But you don't believe it's possible. I believe dreams get you through the hard parts. Whether they come true is different. Then let's make this one come true. She wanted to argue, to point out all the ways it could fail, but looking at his face, seeing the hope mixed with exhaustion and stubborn refusal to give up, she didn't want to kill that hope. We'll try. That's all I'm asking. The night deepened. Naichi kept watch again, though Wade tried to insist he could take a turn. He argued briefly before exhaustion dragged him down into deeper, more peaceful sleep. She sat by the dying fire and thought about canyons and painted walls and what it might feel like to stop running. About Wade's hands building something permanent while hers gathered and hunted. About trusting another person enough to tie her survival to theirs. The thoughts were dangerous. Hope was dangerous. But sitting in the darkness, listening to Wade breathe steady, and even she found she didn't mind the vulnerability as much as expected. Behind them, memories faded into distance. Ahead, the future waited. And for the first time in 3 years, Naichi let herself believe that maybe survival could transform into something more. Something that looked like hope. The second day of preparation dawned cold and clear frost sparkling on the ground. Naichi had slept better, catching 4 solid hours before dawn. Wade was already awake when she stirred, sitting upright and working his shoulder through careful rotations. The improvement was visible. "Morning," he said. "How's the shoulder? Is sore but functional. The ribs are worse." "Ribs take longer. Another week before they're back to full strength." "We don't have another week." "No, we don't." They shared a look, acknowledging the reality they were dancing around. Wade wasn't ready to travel hard, but staying meant gambling. Pike wouldn't return with reinforcements. "Today I need to range farther," Naichi said. "Scout the route west, make sure trails are passable. You'll be alone most of the day." Wade's expression tightened. "I can handle being alone." "Can you handle being alone and unable to run if someone finds the tent?" "I'll manage." She studied him, then moved it to a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. "There's a rifle." Both went still. It was the first time she'd mentioned having one. "You've had a rifle this whole time." "Yes." "Why didn't you use it against Pike?" "Because rifle shots carry for miles." The bow was quieter. Wade nodded slowly. "Smart." She unwrapped the Winchester, checked the action, set it aside with cartridges. "You know how to use this." "I grew up on a ranch. I can shoot." "Good, because if Pike comes back while I'm gone, you'll need it." She spent the next hour showing him defensive positions, sight lines, best places for cover. Wade absorbed it with focused attention. When satisfied, she gathered her pack and bow. "Stay quiet. Stay hidden. If trouble comes, make them pay for finding you." Wade held the rifle with casual competence. "Be careful out there." She nodded and stepped into the cold morning. The sun was clearing the eastern ridge, throwing long shadows. Nothing moved. No dust, just wind through sage. She looked back once, Wade framed in the tent entrance, rifle ready, then turned west and started walking. The land rose gradually as she moved, flats giving way to rolling hills, building toward mountains. She knew this country from memory, had ranged through it during years when her band moved freely. Every canyon had a name. Every spring was mapped in her mind. By mid-morning, she'd covered 6 miles and reached the Three Sisters, 3 pillars of sandstone, standing together like women in conversation. From here, the route west split into 3 options. She chose the middle route, threading through broken country that would slow them, but also hide them. The day wore on. She covered another 8 miles, pushing deep into foothills, climbing where air thinned and temperature dropped. The canyon lay another day's journey ahead, but from this vantage she could see the direction, orient herself by distant peaks she'd known since childhood. It would work. The route was passable. The terrain favored them if they moved smart, but it would test Wade's healing body in ways that might tear open his progress. They'd need to move slow, take frequent breaks, except that a 3-day journey might stretch to 5 or 6. She turned back as shadows lengthened, retracing her path with careful attention. By the time sun touched the western horizon, she was within sight of camp, studying the surrounding area for disturbance. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it. Wade met her at the entrance, rifle still in hand, his face showing strain of a day spent alert and alone. "Any trouble?" she asked. "Nothing. Quiet all day." "Good." She stepped inside, shrugging off her pack. Wade handed her water, then sat heavily. The day's vigilance had cost him. "The route, passable, hard but manageable. We can leave tomorrow if you're ready." "Tomorrow?" His eyebrows rose. "I thought we had another day." "I saw smoke on the eastern horizon, about 15 miles out, too much for a campfire. Multiple sources." Wade's expression went flat. "Pike brought friends." "That's my guess." "How many?" "No way to tell. But if Pike went back to wherever he's based, convinced men to ride with him, we're looking at 5 or 6 minimum." Wade ran a hand through his hair. "I can ride tomorrow. Won't be pretty, but I can do it." "It needs to be more than can. We'll be covering rough ground, moving fast when possible." "I'll keep pace." The steel in his voice allowed no argument. They spent the evening preparing in earnest. Everything they couldn't carry got cached in a dry hollow a quarter-mile from camp, carefully hidden. She kept the tent standing, hoping Pike's men would waste time checking it before realizing their quarry had fled. Wade helped where he could, movements deliberate, in controlled, managing pain through determination. Watching him work, Naichi felt something shift in her chest. Respect, yes, but also something warmer she wasn't ready to examine. They ate cold as full darkness fell, not wanting smoke to give away their position. The food was tasteless, but filling. Wade managed to keep most down despite visible tension. "Get some sleep," Naichi said. "We leave before dawn." "What about you?" "I'll wake you in a few hours. We'll split the watch." Wade looked like he wanted to argue, then settled onto blankets with visible relief. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened. Naichi sat by the entrance bow across her knees and watched the night. Somewhere out there, Pike and his men were riding, drawing closer, driven by wounded pride. Let them come. She and Wade would be gunned by the time they arrived. The hours passed. She woke Wade for his watch, made him promise to wake her at first sign of anything wrong, then collapsed into sleep so deep it felt like drowning. When his hand on her shoulder pulled her back, the sky showed first gray hint of approaching dawn. "Time," he said quietly. She sat up cold, hitting immediately. Wade had already packed their remaining gear, organized everything for quick departure. The rifle was slung across his back. The tent flap was tied open, ready for them to slip out and not look back. Naichi took a last look around the space that had been home for 3 years. The fire pit, the worn blankets, the dried herbs. All of it would stay. All would be discovered by Pike's men. She hoped they'd be angry. Hoped they'd waste time searching, convinced Wade and Naichi couldn't have gone far. "You ready?" Wade asked. Yes. They stepped out into pre-dawn darkness, breath visible in frigid air. Naichi led them west, moving by starlight, in memory taking a route that would leave minimal trace. Behind them, the tent stood empty. Ahead, the land rose toward mountains that promised shelter or death in roughly equal measure. The sky lightened gradually. Stars faded. And Naichi led Wade into country that would test everything they'd built between them. The first mile passed in silence, broken only by footsteps and Wade's carefully controlled breathing. Naichi set a pace balancing speed with sustainability. Every 20 minutes she paused to let him rest, watching his face for signs of strain beyond what he could handle. He never complained, never asked to slow down. But she could see the cost in how he held himself, one arm pressed against his ribs, jaw set against pain. By the time sun cleared the horizon, they'd put 3 miles between themselves and camp. Not enough if Pike's men had started early, but it was progress. The land changed as they climbed flat scrub, giving way to pinyon and juniper ground, becoming rockier, harder to track through, which worked in their favor. Naichi stayed to stone when possible, avoiding soft dirt that would hold prints. Wade stumbled once on loose scree, caught himself against a boulder, stood breathing hard for 30 seconds before nodding. He could continue. They were 2 hours into the journey when she heard it. Faint, distant, but unmistakable horses moving fast across open ground, coming from the east, from the direction of her abandoned camp. She held up a hand. Wade stopped immediately, both frozen listening. The sound came and went on the wind, impossible to judge distance, but close enough that her chest tightened. She motioned for him to follow and changed route, angling north toward rocks that would provide cover and elevation. The climb cost precious time, but gave them what they needed, a vantage point overlooking the land they'd crossed. From this height, maybe 200 feet up, she could see back toward camp, could see dark specks marking riders, 6 of them moving in loose line across the flats. Even at this distance, the pattern was clear, searching, working a grid, looking for which direction their quarry had fled. Wade crouched beside her, breathing labored from the climb. 6 riders. That's more than I expected. Pike must have convinced some locals there was profit in it. She watched the riders for another minute, marking their pace. They moved with purpose, but not desperation, men confident they'd find their target eventually. That confidence would cost them time, make them methodical rather than urgent. Good. How long until they find the camp? Wade asked. They're already at it. See the center group, they've stopped. Even as she spoke, she saw the riders converge, gathering at what had been her home. They'd find it empty. Would search the area, conclude whoever they were hunting had fled with minimal supplies. That miscalculation would buy more time. They'll figure out we went west eventually, Wade said. Trail's not that hard to follow for the first mile. By then we'll be deep enough into broken country that tracking gets harder. She hoped it wouldn't come to that. Hoped they'd stay ahead of pursuit, reach the canyon, disappear into terrain that favored defenders. Can you move faster? Wade's expression tightened, but he nodded. For a while. Not sure how long. Then we move fast now while they're searching, put as much distance as we can. They descended the far side and started moving again, this time at a pace that had Wade breathing hard within minutes. Nachi pushed them, both driven by knowledge that 6 mounted men could cover ground faster than 2 people on foot, one injured. The morning wore into afternoon. They stopped 3 times for water and brief rest, never more than 5 minutes. The landscape rose steadily, valleys deepening, ridges growing sharper. Pine began appearing among juniper. Naichi's legs burned from constant climb. Her shoulders ached from the pack. But these were familiar discomforts, easily ignored. What concerned her more was the way Wade's movements were becoming increasingly mechanical, his body running on determination, while reserves emptied. By mid-afternoon, they'd climbed into country she remembered from childhood. A narrow canyon cutting through red sandstone, its floor choked with cottonwoods, marking seasonal water. She led them down into it, grateful for cover. Wade made it another 100 yards before his legs quit, dropping him to his knees without warning. He caught himself on his hands, head hanging, chest heaving. Naichi was beside him immediately. "How bad?" "Give me a minute." "Wade." He looked up, and for the first time she saw past determination to exhaustion underneath. He was running on empty, had been for miles. "We need to rest, really rest." His jaw worked, pride warring with reality. "If we stop for long, they'll catch up." "If you collapse, they'll definitely catch up. I can't carry you and our supplies." That reached him. He nodded once, frustrated, and let her help him to a flat spot beneath cottonwoods where fallen leaves made natural cushion. He settled with his back against the trunk, eyes closing immediately. Naichi gave him water, then dried meat he had to force down. While he ate, she scrambled back up to the canyon rim and looked east. The land rolled away in shades of brown and green, beautiful and empty as far as she could see. No dust, no movement, but they would come. It was only a matter of time. She slid back down and found Wade exactly where she'd left him, his breathing deeper, edging towards sleep. She let him drift, knowing rest was medicine. While he slept, she took stock with cold calculation. They'd covered maybe 12 miles since dawn, good distance, especially with Wade healing. But the canyon lay another 40 miles west, and they'd just proven they couldn't maintain this pace without breaking him. The arithmetic was unforgiving. If riders picked up their trail, moved at even moderate pace, they'd close the gap within 2 days, which meant staying ahead wasn't enough. They needed to either lose the trail entirely or find a position where pursuit became costly enough that Pike's men gave up. An idea began forming, dangerous but possible. If she could make Pike's men think they'd continued west when they had actually doubled back north, it might buy the time Wade needed. But it would require splitting up. One of them laying a false trail while the other moved Wade to secure hiding. And since Wade couldn't walk well enough to flee if discovered, that meant Naichi would be the one leading pursuit away. Too many variables, too many ways it could fail. But the alternative was being run down on open ground with Wade too exhausted to fight. She sat with the decision for an hour, turning it over, finding no better options. Wade slept through her deliberation. When he finally stirred, the sun had moved noticeably toward the western horizon, shadows lengthening. He opened his eyes slowly, focusing on her face. Something in her expression made him sit up straighter. "What is it?" "We need to talk about our options." That's never a good opening. Despite everything, Naichi felt her mouth twitch. "No, it's not." She laid out her plan, speaking clearly, not softening the risks. Wade listened without interrupting, his face growing progressively more still. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice carrying an edge she hadn't heard before. "No, Wade, absolutely not. You're not using yourself as bait to buy me time. That's not happening. We don't have better options. Then we find some. We keep moving together, or we find a place to make a stand, or we do literally anything except what you just suggested." Naichi felt her own temper stir. A stand gets us both killed. Moving together means they catch us within 2 days. This is the smart play. Smart would be me telling Pike to go to hell and taking my chances alone from the start. We've been making stupid choices since the moment we met, so don't tell me now that splitting up is suddenly rational. His vehemence surprised her. Underneath it, she heard something deeper. Fear, yes, but also recognition that she was proposing to do exactly what he'd been unable to do for his brother, sacrifice herself to save someone else. She gentled her voice. "This is different. I'm not sacrificing anything. I know this country. I can lose them. You think you can. That's not the same as knowing. Nothing's certain, but doing nothing guarantees we both get caught. Wade pushed himself to his feet, swaying before finding balance, his face set with stubborn determination. Then we get caught fighting together. That's the deal. That's what we agreed to when we left your camp. Naichi stood to face him, matching his intensity. We agreed to survive. This is how we survive. This is how you maybe survive while I hide and hope. That's not good enough. They stood toe-to-toe, neither backing down the argument, reaching a point where further words would accomplish nothing. Naichi felt the weight of command she'd carried for 3 years, the habit of making decisions alone. But Wade wasn't hers to command. He was a partner, and partners didn't make unilateral decisions about life and death. The realization settled something in her chest, uncomfortable but true. She'd been thinking of him as someone to protect, to make choices for. But that wasn't what he needed or wanted. She exhaled, slowly releasing the argument. All right, we find another way. Wade's expression shifted, surprise and relief mixing. All right, you made your position clear. I heard it, so we find another way. He studied her face, looking for the catch, then seemed to accept she meant it. Thank you. They stood in awkward silence, both still keyed up, neither quite sure how to step back from the edge. Finally, Naichi moved to her pack and pulled out the last of their food. Eat, then we planned together. They ate in growing twilight, the canyon walls catching last rays of sun and turning red stone to copper and gold. When they'd finished, Naichi spread out a mental map between them, describing terrain ahead, possible routes, places that offered advantage or exposure. Wade contributed observations from his own experience, pointing out tactical considerations she'd missed, suggesting alternatives. Between them, they sketched out a plan less elegant than what Naichi had proposed, but with the virtue of keeping them together. They would continue west through the night, using darkness to mask movement. The riders would likely stop at dusk, make camp resume tracking in morning. That gave them 8 or 10 hours of movement without being spotted. If they pushed through exhaustion, they could make another 10 miles before dawn, put real distance between themselves and pursuit. Then they'd find a defensive position in high country and rest through the day, watching for signs they'd been followed. If Pike's men appeared, they'd have elevation and cover. If the riders missed their trail in darkness, they'd be far enough ahead that continuing to the canyon became possible. It wasn't perfect. It depended on Wade holding together through another night of hard travel. But it kept them together, and after the confrontation, Naichi found that mattered more than she wanted to admit. They rested until last, light faded, gathering strength. Wade used the time to check his wound, changing the bandage. The cut was closed, healing clean, the skin pink and healthy. Another week and it would be nothing but a scar. When full darkness had settled and stars emerged cold and brilliant overhead, they started moving again. Naichi led them up out of the canyon via a route requiring scrambling over loose rock, using hands as much as feet. Wade managed it through determination and careful placement, never rushing. At the rim, they paused to let him catch breath, then struck west again across country that rose and fell in irregular waves. The starlight was enough to navigate by once their eyes adjusted. They walked for 2 hours before Naichi allowed brief rest. Wade sank to the ground, gratefully breathing harsh and quiet night. When they started again 10 minutes later, his movements had grown mechanical, his body operating on pure will. Past midnight, the temperature dropped sharply, the kind of cold that cut through clothing and settled in bones. Naichi watched Wade for signs of hypothermia, ready to stop if necessary, but he kept moving with stubborn consistency. One foot in front of the other, repeat until sunrise or collapse, whichever came first. They were crossing open ground when Wade spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Why did you agree? To what? To not splitting up. You were right that it would have worked. Higher probability of success than what we're doing now. So why did you back down? Naichi walked several more steps before answering, choosing words carefully. Because you were right that we're partners. Partners don't make decisions that way. And because I've already lost one person I cared about by making choices alone, I won't do that again. Wade absorbed that in silence. When he spoke again, his voice carried something warmer than the night around them. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice 3 years ago. Walking away from revenge. It took more strength than pulling a trigger would have. Some days I believe that. Most days I don't. I believe it enough for both of us. They lapsed back into quiet saving breath for miles ahead. The night wore on in that rhythm walk and rest and walk again, the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small drama of survival playing out beneath them. Dawn found them high in the foothills tucked into a pocket between two ridges where wind-twisted pine provided cover. They'd covered the miles Nietzsche had hoped for, maybe more putting distance between themselves and anyone trying to follow a trail late in darkness. Wade made it to the shelter of trees before his legs gave out, completely dropping him to his knees and then his side too exhausted to protest. Nietzsche checked him quickly, confirming he was just spent, not injured or fevered. His pulse was strong, breathing regular if fast. Sleep would restore him. She made him drink before letting unconsciousness take him, then arranged blankets to keep his core warm. Only when satisfied he was settled did she allow herself to sit back against rough bark, every muscle protesting. They'd made it through the night, put real distance between themselves and pursuit. That counted as a win. Nietzsche forced herself to eat, knowing her body needed fuel. Then she climbed to a vantage point overlooking the way they'd come, settling in to watch for signs of pursuit while Wade slept. The morning passed in that vigil. The sun climbed, painting landscape in harsh clarity. Nothing moved across the country below except a circling hawk. No dust, no riders. Which could mean Pike's men had lost the trail in darkness. Or it could mean they were too far back to be visible, yet still tracking, still coming. No way to know which until more time passed. Nietzsche stayed at her post through midday, eyes burning from constant scanning, her body stiff from immobility. Below, Wade slept the deep sleep of complete exhaustion, occasionally shifting, but never quite waking. It was afternoon when she saw them. Far to the east, maybe 5 miles distant, movement on a ridgeline. Too far for details, but unmistakable in pattern riders in single file, picking their way along the route she and Wade had taken. 6 of them, just as before, still tracking, despite darkness that should have broken the trail. Her stomach dropped. Pike must have someone with him who knew tracking someone good enough to follow sign by moonlight or piece together a trail from broken twigs and disturbed ground. She watched until the riders dropped below a ridgeline and disappeared, then scrambled back down to where Wade slept. He woke to her hand on his shoulder, came alert with instant clarity. They're coming, 5 miles back, maybe less. Moving steady. Wade sat up, wincing as stiff muscles protested. How long until they reach this position? 2 hours if they maintain pace, maybe 3 if terrain slows them. And how far to the canyon from here? 28 miles, 2 days at the pace we can manage. The math was brutal and obvious. They couldn't outrun mounted riders with Wade moving at half his normal capability. They couldn't hide effectively with someone who could track them through darkness. They couldn't fight 6 armed men with 1 rifle and a bow. Wade pushed himself to his feet, testing his legs, finding them functional, if not strong. Then we go to ground, find a position we can defend, make them pay too high a price to be worth continuing. 6 against 2 isn't defensive, it's suicide. Maybe, but I'm done running, done letting other people set the terms. If Pike wants a fight, we'll give him one that costs him more than he's willing to pay. Nietzsche wanted to argue, to point out all the ways that plan ended badly. But looking at Wade's face, seeing the set of his jaw and the flat certainty in his eyes, she recognized something she'd seen in her own mirror, the look of someone who'd reached the end of retreat and found solid ground to stand on. Sometimes the only choice was between running until you died tired or standing and dying on your feet. She scanned their surroundings with fresh eyes, looking for defensive advantages. The pocket they'd slept in was protected on 3 sides by steep slopes that channeled approach from a single direction. The pine trees were thin enough to shoot through, but thick enough to break up sight lines. A tumble of boulders at the narrow end provided hard cover. It wasn't perfect. It would never withstand determined assault by superior numbers, but it would cost anyone attacking in blood and time and risk, and sometimes that was enough to make people reconsider. We'll need defenses, barriers to slow them down, lanes of fire that favor us. Wade's expression shifted to something like relief, recognizing she'd accepted the choice without needing it, explained further. Tell me what you need. They spent the next hour transforming the pocket into something approximating a fortress. Fallen branches stacked to create barriers that forced approach into narrow lanes. Rocks positioned to provide firing positions with clear sight lines but good cover. Spare ammunition distributed between multiple points. It was grim work building the place where they might die, but there was comfort in action and having concrete tasks that pushed back waiting and fear. Wade moved with purpose despite obvious exhaustion, his body responding to necessity. When they'd done everything possible, they settled into position behind the boulder pile and waited. The sun tracked west. Shadows lengthened. The afternoon wore into early evening with no sign of pursuit appearing. Naichi began to hope they'd miscalculated, that Pike's men had missed some crucial turn and wandered off in the wrong direction. That hope lasted until she heard the horses, faint at first, then growing clearer. Multiple animals moving through forest, picking their way round the obstacles coming closer. The sound carried strange and evening air, seeming to come from everywhere at once, until suddenly it resolved into single clear direction, east up, the same approach they'd used. Wade checked the rifle one more time, making sure the action was clear and magazine full. Naichi knocked an arrow and waited, her heart rate steady despite adrenaline beginning to flood her system. The first rider appeared through trees, moving cautiously, eyes scanning ahead. Pike looking worse than when Naichi had shot him on the flats. He sat his horse wrong, favoring the leg with the arrow wound, his face drawn tight with pain and anger. Behind him, 5 others spread out in loose formation, weapons drawn, moving like men expecting trouble. They stopped 30 yards from the pocket, Pike's hand coming up in a signal that froze everyone in place. For a long moment, nobody moved, both sides aware of the other, everyone calculating odds and angles and the cost of the fight that seemed increasingly inevitable. Then Pike's voice carried across the distance, rough but controlled. "You in there, Brennan?" Wade didn't answer immediately. Naichi glanced at him, saw him considering responses. "I'm here," he called back finally. "Good. Wasn't sure if that Apache bitch had left you to save her own skin." Naichi felt rage flash hot, but kept her face neutral, her bow steady. Wade's jaw tightened, but he didn't take the bait. "What do you want, Pike?" "What I've wanted since you stole my horse and cut my leg. I want you bleeding in the dirt. I didn't steal anything. You tried to take what was mine, and I defended myself." Pike's laugh was ugly, humorless. "That's the story you're telling. Way I remember it, we offered fair price and you got violent. Fair price at gunpoint isn't much of an offer. Details. Point is, you embarrassed me. Then she shot me and one of my boys. That's not the kind of thing a man forgets." Wade shifted positions slightly, getting better angle behind the boulder. "So what now? You've got us pinned. You're going to try rushing this position and lose how many men doing it? 3, 4. That seemed like a good trade." Pike was quiet, and Naichi could almost hear him thinking through the math. 6 men against 2 sounded favorable until you factored in defenders having cover and elevation and clear sight lines. An assault would succeed eventually, but the cost would be severe. "Here's what I'm offering," Pike said after a moment. "You come out, take what's coming to you like a man, and I let the woman ride away. She's not part of this." Wade glanced at Naichi, something complicated in his expression. She met his eyes and shook her head once sharp and final. "Not interested in your offers," Wade called back. "We stay together. You want me, you come through her first." Pike's face darkened even at that distance. "You're going to die for a woman you barely know." "Maybe, but at least I'll die standing instead of running." The words hung in the evening air, carrying weight beyond their simple meaning. Naichi felt something shift in her chest, recognition that Wade had just drawn a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Pike spat into the dirt. "Your funeral. We'll wait you out. Got all the time in the world, and you're on that ridge with no water and no way down. Couple days you'll be desperate enough to make mistakes." He turned his horse and signaled his men to fall back. They withdrew into trees, moving out of rifle range, but staying close enough that their presence was obvious. Setting up for siege rather than assault. Wade lowered the rifle slightly. "They're right about the water. We've got maybe a day's worth between us. There's a spring 2 miles north. We could reach it after dark if we move careful. With them watching every direction, we'd be spotted before we made it 100 yards. Naichi knew he was right. The tactical situation was exactly what Pike had described, trapped on high ground with superior position but limited resources. A classic siege where defenders inevitably lost. She studied terrain with new purpose, looking for routes that might work in darkness. The slopes behind their position were steep but not impossible. If they descended quietly, stayed low, used every bit of cover they might slip past Pike's cordon and reach the spring. It was risky. Risky enough that failure meant being caught in the open with nowhere to run. But staying meant slow death from dehydration. After full dark, she said quietly, we go down the back slope. There's a draw that runs north, stays in dead ground most of the way. If we're quiet and careful, we can make it. And if we can't, then we fight in the open instead of from cover, and we die faster. Wade absorbed that, nodded once. I can live with those odds. They settled in to wait for darkness, taking turns watching Pike's men set up camp in the trees below. It was professional work, organized and efficient. These weren't random drifters. They were men who'd done this before. That raised questions about who Pike really was, what resources he could draw on. You ever wonder if Pike told you the truth? Nietzsche asked after long silence. About why he wanted your horse. About whether this whole thing isn't about more than he's said. Wade was quiet, considering. I wondered, but I figured it didn't matter. Man tries to take something that's mine by force. His reasons don't change what I do about it. Maybe, but if this is about more than a horse, if Pike has resources we don't know about, that changes what we're up against. Changes it how? Changes whether losing 6 men would make him quit or just make him angry enough to bring 20 next time. Wade's expression darkened as he followed that logic. You're saying this doesn't end even if we get away. I'm saying we don't know what this is really about, and not knowing makes planning harder. They lapsed back into silence. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Below, smoke rose from Pike's camp as they built fires. Confident, comfortable. Let them be certain. Certainty made people careless. Full darkness came slowly. Nietzsche used the time to check their supplies one more time. Wade did the same with weapons, making sure nothing would rattle or catch. When the last light had faded and stars emerged bright and cold, they began their descent. Nietzsche led, picking each foot placement with extreme care, avoiding loose rock and brittle branches. Wade followed close behind, mimicking her movements. The slope was treacherous in darkness, steep enough that one wrong step meant sliding and noise and discovery. They moved at the pace of growing grass, each foot of progress taking minutes. Halfway down, Wade's boot dislodged a small stone that rattled down the slope ahead of them. They froze, hearts pounding, waiting to see if the sound had carried. From below, distant voices continued their conversation undisturbed. No alarm. The stone had gone unnoticed. They continued, reaching the bottom without further incident. The draw Nietzsche had mentioned opened before them, a natural channel carved by seasonal water, its bottom thick with sand that muffled footsteps. She led them north, moving as fast as she dared. The spring lay beyond a low ridge protected by a circle of cottonwoods. They'd covered maybe a mile when Nietzsche heard a horse snorting somewhere ahead and to the left. Too close. Much too close. She froze, one hand going back to warn Wade. He stopped immediately, both utterly still, listening. Another snort, then the creak of leather and low murmur of a voice. Pike had posted guards along the perimeter. Smart. Professional. Exactly what Nietzsche had feared. They were trapped between the ridge they'd descended and a patrol they hadn't anticipated. Going back meant climbing exhausted and giving up on water. Going forward meant trying to slip past the guard. Staying meant being discovered when dawn came. Nietzsche made the only choice that gave them any chance. She motioned for Wade to follow and angled away from the guard's voice, moving even more carefully than before. The draw curved, following natural lie of land, taking them farther from the spring, but also farther from immediate danger. They moved like ghosts through darkness, every sense straining for warning. The night stretched around them, vast and cold and unforgiving. An hour passed, then another. They'd circled wide around where Pike's men had camped, moving through country that grew increasingly rough. No spring, no water, just distance and exhaustion and growing certainty that they'd traded one trap for another equally deadly. Wade stumbled twice in that second hour, fatigue finally catching up. The second time, he went down to one knee and stayed there, breathing hard, his body reaching limits that couldn't be pushed further. Nietzsche crouched beside him, close enough to whisper, "Can you continue? Give me a minute." They didn't have a minute. Dawn was maybe 3 hours away, and when it came, Pike's men would discover the empty defensive position and start searching in earnest. But Wade couldn't move, and pushing him harder would break him completely. Nietzsche made another choice, settled beside him in the darkness. pulled out the last of their water and made him drink half, shared the final piece of dried meat between them. If they were going to be caught, at least they'd be caught together. Wade's breathing gradually steadied. He looked at her in the starlight, something soft in his expression, despite everything. I'm sorry. For what? For slowing you down, for not being strong enough, for every choice that led to us sitting in the dirt waiting for dawn. Naichi was quiet for a moment, then reached out and took his hand. The gesture surprised them both, but she didn't pull away. I'd rather be here with you than safe and alone. Remember that when the sun comes up. Wade's fingers tightened on hers, the only answer he seemed capable of giving. They sat that way for a time that might have been minutes or hours, holding on to each other, while darkness surrounded them. When Wade finally felt capable of moving again, they started walking. Not toward any specific destination, just away from where they'd been, hoping distance and direction would somehow combine into salvation. The land rose and fell, stars wheeled overhead, and two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances kept moving through the night together until the very end. Dawn arrived not with drama, but with slow inevitability, the eastern sky lightening from black to gray to pale blue. Naiche and Wade huddled in the shelter of an overhang they'd found an hour before sunrise. They'd covered maybe 3 more miles in darkness, no water, no clear route to safety, just exhaustion and growing certainty that daylight would expose them. The sun cleared the horizon, harsh and unforgiving. Naichi scanned the land visible from their position. For 10 minutes, she saw nothing. Then a glint of metal caught her eye maybe a mile to the southeast. Riders, moving in a search pattern, spreading out to cover ground. She touched Wade's shoulder gently. He woke with a start, hand going to the rifle before awareness returned. They're out there, searching. Wade pushed himself upright with visible effort. How many? I count 4, which means 2 more are somewhere else, probably covering other directions. They're being systematic. Yes, that single word carried implications they both understood. Systematic meant thorough, meant patient, meant Pike wasn't going to give up. Wade slumped back against rock. We can't outrun horses, can't hide indefinitely without water, can't fight 6 men. He looked at her directly. Tell me honestly, what are our chances? Naichi considered lying, then decided he deserved truth. Without water, we have maybe today. Tomorrow we'll be too weak to run. By the 3rd day, we'll be dead, whether Pike finds us or not. So we're done. Maybe. Maybe. She pointed north toward where land rose into genuine mountains. There's a place my people used during the wars. A cave system, hidden entrance, natural spring inside. If we can reach it before they find us, we might survive long enough for them to give up searching. Wade followed her gesture. How far? 6 miles, maybe 7. He barked a laugh that held no humor. Might as well be 60 in our condition. And we'd have to cross open ground. They'd spot us before we made it halfway. Probably. But you want to try anyway. Naichi met his eyes. I want to live. And sitting here waiting for Pike isn't living. It's just dying slow. Wade was quiet, turning it over, weighing impossible odds against certain death. Finally, he nodded, once sharp and decisive. Then we move. Fast as we can manage. If they spot us, at least we'll die trying instead of just accepting it. They gathered their minimal gear, checked the weapons one final time, and stepped out into morning sun that felt like exposure itself. The land stretched open around them, offering minimal cover. Perfect country for hunters. Terrible country for prey. Naichi led them north at the fastest pace Wade could sustain. He moved with mechanical determination, his body running on fumes and will every step a small victory over exhaustion trying to drag him down. They covered a mile before the first shout carried across the distance. Naichi's head snapped around. There to the east, a rider on a ridgeline, pointing in their direction. Already wheeling his horse to signal the others. They'd been spotted. Run, Naichi said quietly. Wade didn't waste breath on questions. He just started running, or what passed for running in his condition. More of a stumbling jog that ate ground without grace but kept him moving forward. Naichi matched his pace, one hand on his elbow, when he faltered. Behind them, more shouts, the drumming of hooves growing louder. Pike's men converging, sensing the hunt reaching its conclusion. 2 miles. They made 2 miles before Wade's legs simply stopped obeying him. He pitched forward, caught himself on his hands, tried to rise and couldn't. His chest heaved with each breath, his face gray. She knelt beside him. Wade, you have to get up. Can't. You can. You have to. Leave me. Take the rifle. Maybe you can make it. We've had this conversation. I'm not leaving you. The hoofbeats were close now, maybe half a mile, close enough that individual voices became distinguishable. Pike's voice among them, shouting orders. Naichi looked around desperately. A defensible position. A place to make a stand. Some miraculous escape route. She found none of those things. What she found was a narrow ravine 30 yards to their left, barely visible from ground level. Not deep enough to hide in, not protected enough to defend from. But it ran in the right direction, angled toward the foothills, and its steep sides would slow horses. She grabbed Wade under the arms and pulled. He tried to help, got his feet under him, managed 3 lurching steps before his knees buckled again. She caught him, took more of his weight, half carried and half dragged him toward the ravine. They tumbled into it together, sliding down the loose sides, landing in a heap at the bottom. Wade groaned but didn't cry out. Naichi scrambled to her feet, helping him sit upright against the ravine wall, then moved to where she could see back the way they'd come. The riders appeared moments later, 6 of them fanned out in a line, moving at a controlled canter. They'd seen where their prey had gone to ground and were approaching carefully, weapons drawn. Pike rode at the center, still favoring his wounded leg, but sitting his horse with grim determination. He raised a hand and the line stopped just out of rifle range. "End of the line, Brennan," Pike called out. "Nowhere left to run. Come on out and let's finish this." Naichi chambered around in the rifle, the metallic sound carrying clearly. She positioned herself where she had clear sight line, but was protected by the ravine wall. "First man who comes closer gets a bullet," she shouted back. "I don't miss at this range." Pike's expression went cold. "You've got 1 rifle against 6 of us. Math isn't in your favor." "No, but I'll take at least 2 of you with me before you bring me down. Maybe 3 if you're stupid about the approach. You volunteering to be first." That created hesitation among Pike's men, exactly as she'd intended. They'd signed up for a hunt. Actually dying for Pike's wounded pride was a different calculation. Pike sensed the shift in his men's attitude. His voice hardened. "Double shares to whoever drops her. And the man who brings me Brennan alive gets triple." Money changed the equation. 2 of the younger riders exchanged glances, then started to dismount, planning to approach on foot where they'd present harder targets. Then Wade's voice cut through the tension, weaker than before, but still carrying. "Pike, you want me, not her. Let her walk away and I'll come out. No fight, no more bullets. Just you and me settling this however you want." Naichi's head whipped around. "Wade, no, Dio, it's my life," he said quietly. "My choice." "Like hell it is." Pike laughed, ugly and satisfied. "Now that's more like it. See, you had the right idea from the start, Brennan. Let the woman go, you take what's coming, everyone else lives." Naichi felt rage flash hot and immediate. She kept the rifle trained on Pike's men but spoke to Wade without looking at him. "You're not doing this. We're out of options. Then we fight until we can't fight anymore. But you don't get to surrender yourself thinking it saves me." Wade's hand found her ankle squeezed once. "Listen to me. You can still make it. Take the rifle slip out the back while they're focused on me. By the time they realize you're gone, you'll have a head start. You know the country. You can disappear. Not without you. Then we both die here. That what you want?" Naichi's throat tightened. Every part of her screamed against what Wade was suggesting. But she also knew he was right about the tactics. If she left now while Pike's attention was on Wade, she might make it. But the cost was abandoning him to whatever Pike had planned. Before she could respond, one of Pike's men made his move, broke from the line at a run, zigzagging to present a harder target. Naichi swung her aim and fired in one smooth motion. The man went down hard, clutching his legs, screaming. The other riders scattered, immediately diving off horses and scrambling for cover. Return fire erupted, bullets kicking up dirt along the ravine's edge. One round striking close enough that Naichi felt the spray of debris against her face. She dropped flat, crawling back to where Wade sat, both pressed against the wall, as more rounds cracked overhead. The sharp smell of gunpowder filled the air. Wade had the pistol out now, though his hand shook. He met Naichi's eyes with something like apology. Guess that settles the surrender question. Despite everything, Naichi felt her mouth twitch. Guess so. More gunfire. A bullet struck the wall above them, showering them with rock fragments. Naichi blind-fired over the edge, not expecting to hit anything, but wanting to discourage anyone getting brave. The shooting stopped abruptly. Pike's voice carried across the sudden silence. You just killed yourself, woman. No more offers. No more mercy. We're coming in, and when we're done with you, I'm going to make Brennan watch before I finish him. Naichi reloaded his rifle with hands that stayed steady through long practice. Counted her remaining ammunition. 12 rounds, enough to make Pike regret his decision. Not enough to win. Wade shifted beside her, checking his pistol. How many shots you got? 6, plus what's in the rifle. So we go down fighting. Looks like. He nodded once accepting it. Then without preamble, he leaned over and kissed her. Brief, clumsy tasting of dust and exhaustion and something that might have been goodbye. When he pulled back, his eyes held hers. For what it's worth, I'm glad I found you. Glad these last days happened the way they did. Naichi's throat closed around the words she wanted to say. Instead, she just nodded, squeezed his hand once, then turned back to face the opening of the ravine where Pike's men would come. She heard them moving into position, coordinating their approach. Professional, patient. They'd rush from multiple angles, overwhelm through superior firepower. End this in seconds or minutes. Naichi steadied her breathing, picked her first target, prepared to make every round count. Then the world exploded with the sound of a bugle. Clear and sharp and utterly unexpected, the notes cut through the morning air with martial precision. Naichi's head snapped around, trying to locate the source. From the north, from the direction they'd been heading, movement on the ridgeline. Riders, coming fast. But not Pike's men. Blue uniforms. Cavalry. At least 20 of them, maybe more, streaming down from the high ground in disciplined formation. An officer at their lead, saber drawn, shouting orders that carried on the wind. Pike's men saw them the same instant Naichi did. Confusion rippled through their ranks, voices raised in question and alarm. They'd been hunting 2 exhausted fugitives. They weren't prepared for a cavalry patrol appearing out of nowhere. Pike himself stood frozen, caught between completing his hunt and dealing with this new threat. The hesitation cost him precious seconds. By the time he shouted for his men to mount up and scatter, the cavalry was already too close. What followed was chaos. Pike's men broke in different directions, some trying to ride east, others south, all abandoning formation in favor of escape. The cavalry split smoothly, smaller groups pursuing individual riders with practiced efficiency. Only Pike himself didn't run immediately. He looked toward the ravine where Naichi and Wade hid, his face twisted with fury and frustration, clearly torn between completing what he'd started and preserving his own life. The decision was made for him when a cavalry sergeant wheeled his horse directly into Pike's path, rifle raised. Drop your weapon. You're under arrest for attempted murder of civilians on federal land. Pike's jaw worked, rage and calculation warring. Then with visible reluctance, he let his rifle fall and raised his hands. The sergeant motioned for 2 troopers to secure him while the rest finished rounding up the scattered riders. Naichi and Wade remained frozen in the ravine, neither quite believing what they were witnessing. Salvation arriving at the exact moment they'd resigned themselves to death. The officer who'd led the charge rode to the ravine's edge and looked down at them. He was maybe 30, with weathered face and calm eyes of a man accustomed to violence without being hardened by it. You folks all right down there? Naichi found her voice first. We're alive, though. Good, that's a start. He dismounted and slid down into the ravine. You're injured, he said to Wade. How bad? Knife wound, week old, I'll live. Let's make sure of that. He called up to the sergeant. Get the medical kit down here. Naichi finally lowered the rifle, though she didn't set it aside. 3 years of trusting no one didn't evaporate just because someone wore a uniform. The officer noticed, offered a faint smile. I'm Lieutenant James Thornton, 3rd Cavalry out of Fort Bayard. We've been tracking Pike and his men for 3 days. When we heard gunfire this morning, we came to investigate. Lucky for you, we did. Lucky, Wade echoed the word, carrying layers of meaning. Thornton crouched beside them. You mind telling me what Pike wanted with you badly enough to chase you across half of New Mexico? Wade and Naichi exchanged glances. The truth was complicated, but Thornton seemed willing to listen. Wade spoke first. Started with a horse, ended with a lot more. Not sure I understand all of it myself. Thornton nodded slowly as if this matched some pattern he recognized. Pike's been operating in this territory for 6 months, running what amounts to a protection racket disguised as legitimate trade. Settlers pay him to keep their property safe from bandits that turn out to be his own men. Anyone who refuses gets visited in the night. That information landed like a physical blow. Naichi felt pieces clicking into place. The horse, she said slowly. He didn't want it because it was valuable. He wanted to make an example. Most likely, Thornton agreed. Show what happens when someone tells him no. Problem is you survived the lesson, then you shot him and his men when they came after you. That made you both threats to his operation. Witnesses who could testify to what he really is. Wade's expression had gone dark. So this was never about a horse at all. Probably not. The corporal appeared with a medical kit. Thornton examined Wade's wound with practiced efficiency. This is good work, he said, glancing at Naichi. You have medical training. My grandmother taught me. She taught you well. Wounds clean healing properly. Another week of rest, and you'll be back to normal. Rest sounds good, Wade admitted. Thornton repacked the wound with fresh bandages. We're taking Pike and his men back to Fort Bayard for trial. You will both need to come with us, give statements about what happened. After that, you're free to go wherever you want. Naichi stiffened slightly. We have to go to the fort. Thornton caught the wariness in her voice. I know relations between the army and your people haven't been good, but I promise you'll be treated as witnesses, not prisoners. You have my word. Wade touched Naichi's arm lightly. We need water, medical supplies, rest. The fort can provide those things. She wanted to argue, but Wade was right about their immediate needs, and Thornton's eyes held something that looked genuine. How far to the fort? She asked finally. Day's ride. We'll take it slow, given your condition. Above them, the cavalry had finished securing Pike and his men. Hands-bound weapons confiscated 5 riders who'd been hunters, suddenly transformed into prisoners. Pike himself sat his horse with rigid fury, staring at the ravine with murder in his eyes. Thornton helped Wade to his feet, then offered a hand to Naichi. She took it after a moment's hesitation. At the top, the full scope of their rescue became clear. 23 cavalry troopers, disciplined and well-equipped. Against them, Pike and 5 men looked suddenly small and manageable. One of the troopers brought horses for Wade and Naichi. She mounted with ingrained skill. Wade managed with more difficulty, his injured side making the motion awkward, but he got himself settled. Thornton gave orders for the column to form up. Pike and his men were placed in the center, surrounded by troopers. Wade and Naichi rode near the front, close to Thornton, positioned as protected witnesses rather than prisoners. As they started moving, Naichi looked back once toward the north, toward where the cave system lay hidden in the mountains. The sanctuary she'd been trying to reach. The place she'd imagined building a new life with Wade. Maybe someday they'd still make it there. Wade caught her looking. We'll come back, he said quietly, when this is over. We'll find that canyon you talked about and build something permanent. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that promises made in exhaustion would hold once they reached safety. But she'd learned the future was uncertain at best. Still she nodded. Let him have his hope. Let herself share it just a little. They rode south through the morning, the sun climbing toward noon, the land opening up as they descended from high country. Pike and his men said nothing, saving their words for lawyers and judges, but their presence was a constant reminder that the danger had been real and immediate. By midday, they stopped to rest and water horses. Wade slid from his saddle with visible relief. Naichi stayed mounted a moment longer, surveying the country around them. Open ground, good sight lines, no obvious threats, but she couldn't shake the feeling of exposure. Thornton approached, offering a canteen. You've been running a long time. It wasn't a question. She took the canteen, drank deeply. 3 years. That's a long time to be alone. Until it isn't. Thornton glanced toward where Wade sat resting. He's a good man, I can see that. Not many would stand and fight, knowing they'd lose rather than leave someone behind. No, not many. You planning to stay together after the trial? The question was personal, but Thornton asked it with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. I don't know. Haven't thought past today. Fair enough. But for what it's worth, I hope you do. People like you two who've survived what you've survived. You deserve the chance to build something better. He walked away before she could respond. Naichi sat processing thoughts she'd been trying not to examine too closely. What came after survival? What did building something mean when everything you'd built before had been destroyed? The column moved on after 30 minutes. The terrain changed gradually, mountains giving way to rolling hills, pine forests thinning to scrub, and grassland. By late afternoon, the walls of Fort Bayard became visible in the distance. Naichi felt her chest tighten as they approached. The last time she'd been near a fort, her husband had still been alive, and her people had still believed the army could be negotiated with. Both had proven tragically wrong. Wade rode closer, his horse matching pace with hers. You all right? No, but I'll manage. If you want to leave, we can leave. Right now, before we get inside those walls. She looked at him, saw the sincerity in the offer. And go where we have no supplies, no water, and you can barely stay in a saddle. We'd die in 2 days. Maybe, but at least we'd die free. The sentiment was beautiful and stupid in equal measure. Freedom was meaningless if you were dead, but Naichi appreciated that he'd offered. We go to the fort, she said firmly. Give our statements, rest, then we decide what comes next. Wade nodded and they rode through the main gate together. The interior of Fort Bayard was organized chaos, soldiers drilling civilians, moving between buildings, the constant activity of a military post in full operation. Thornton led them directly to the commandant's office, bypassing curious stares and whispered questions. The commandant was a colonel in his 50s, gray-haired and weathered, with the direct manner of someone who'd spent 30 years making decisions. He listened to Thornton's brief report, asked a few clarifying questions, then turned his attention to Wade and Naichi. Lieutenant Thornton speaks highly of you both, says you were defending yourselves against Pike's aggression. That's accurate, Wade said. And you, the colonel, looked at Naichi, are Apache. Yes. Chiricahua. Yes. He studied her for a long moment. You have family on the reservation. I have no family anywhere. Something shifted in his face, a flicker that might have been sympathy. Then you are welcome here as a witness and nothing more. No one will interfere with your freedom or treat you as anything other than what you are, a civilian who aided in the apprehension of wanted criminals. The formal words carried weight. Naichi nodded once, accepting it without fully trusting it. We'll need written statements from both of you, the colonel continued, detailing Pike's actions, the attack on you. Everything relevant to the charges we'll be bringing. After that, you're free to remain here as guests or depart as you see fit. How long until the trial? Wade asked. Territorial judge makes his circuit once a month. He was here last week, so it'll be 3 weeks before he returns. We'll hold Pike and his men in the stockade until then. 3 weeks, longer than Naichi had spent in one place in years. But Wade needed the rest, needed time for his wound to heal completely. And if she was honest, she needed it too. We'll stay, she said before Wade could speak, for the trial. The colonel nodded and dismissed them with instructions to report to the post surgeon and then to the quartermaster for temporary quarters. They found the surgeon in a building that smelled of carbolic and blood. He examined Wade's wound with professional thoroughness, clucked his tongue at the healing cut, then rebandaged everything with clean supplies and instructions to return daily. The quartermaster assigned them a small cabin on the edge of the fort's perimeter, 2 rooms with basic furniture and a potbelly stove. By the time they'd settled in, evening was falling. Wade sat on one of the rough beds and simply stared at the wall, his face drawn tight with weariness that came from carrying tension for days and finally being able to release it. Naichi moved to the stove and got a fire going. When she turned back, Wade had laid down without bothering to remove his boots, already drifting towards sleep. She pulled a blanket over him, then sat in the room's single chair and watched him sleep. His face relaxed, gradually lines smoothing, breathing, deepening to the rhythm of genuine rest. They'd survived. Against odds that should have killed them several times over, they'd survived. Now they had to figure out what survival meant beyond just staying alive. The days that followed settled into a routine neither had experienced in years. Wake at dawn, report to the surgeon for Wade's dressing change. Write detailed accounts of Pike's actions for Army lawyers building their case. Eat meals in the communal dining hall. Sleep in actual beds with doors that locked and walls that kept out wind. It should have been a relief. Should have felt like sanctuary. But Naichi found herself restless within the fort's confines, her body remembering 3 years of open space while her mind tried to adjust to structure and rules and constant presence of others. Wade adapted more easily, his years on ranches having prepared him for communal living. He fell naturally into conversations with soldiers, helped where he could with labor around the fort, spent hours giving testimony. She watched him integrate and felt the distance between them grow in subtle ways that had nothing to do with affection and everything to do with belonging. He belonged here or could belong in a way she never would. It was on the fifth day that Thornton found her sitting alone on the ramparts, watching the sun set over country she'd once moved through without restriction. "You look like someone planning an escape," he said, settling beside her. "Should I be planning one?" "That depends. Are you a prisoner?" "No." "Then it's not an escape, it's just leaving." Naichi glanced at him. "You think I should leave?" "I think you're miserable here. Have been since you arrived. And I think Wade knows it, but doesn't know what to do about it." "Wade belongs here, I don't." "Does he belong here, or is he just better at pretending?" That made her look at him more directly. Thornton met her eyes with calm certainty. "I've watched you both this week. He's going through motions, doing what's expected, but his eyes track to you constantly, checking where you are, how you're doing, whether you need anything. That's not a man who's found his place. That's a man whose place is wherever you are." The observation landed harder than Naichi expected. She'd been so focused on her own discomfort that she hadn't fully registered Wade's behavior. "What am I supposed to do with that?" she asked quietly. "Talk to him. Figure out what you both want, where you want to be, because 3 weeks is a long time to spend pretending when you could be planning." Thornton stood and headed back toward the interior of the fort, leaving Naichi alone with thoughts she'd been avoiding. She sat until full dark, watching stars emerge one by one, thinking about canyons and painted walls and what it meant to build something permanent with another person. When she finally returned to their cabin, Wade was awake, sitting at the small table with papers spread before him. Documents related to the trial statements that needed his signature. He looked up as she entered, relief obvious on his face. "Was starting to worry you'd decided to leave." "Thought about it." "But you didn't." "Not yet." Wade set down the pen. "What's stopping you?" Naichi moved to the window. This, not knowing what comes after the trial ends." "What do you want to come after?" It was the same question Thornton had implied. What did she want? She turned to face Wade. "I want what you described that night before Pike came. A canyon with painted walls. A place we build together and defend together and make ours together. But I don't know if that's what you still want, or if it was just something you said when dying seemed more likely than living." Wade stood, closing the distance until he could take her hands in his. His grip was warm, solid, real. "I meant it then. Mean it now. Mean it more after this week, watching you be miserable inside walls and knowing I'm part of why you're staying. You're not—" "Let me finish." His voice was gentle but firm. "I know you hate it here. Know the fort makes you feel trapped, but I also know you're staying because leaving would mean leaving me behind, and you've decided I'm worth that cost." Naichi wanted to deny it but couldn't. "What I need you to understand," Wade continued, "is that I'm worth exactly nothing if being with me makes you less than you are. So after the trial, we leave, together. We find that canyon and we build something that belongs to both of us and no one else. What about Pike? What if he's convicted, serves time, comes after us when he's released? Then we deal with it when it happens. But we don't let the possibility of future danger stop us from living the life we want now." It was the most certain she'd ever heard him. The clarity was its own kind of gift. "All right," she said. "After the trial, we go west and we don't look back." Wade's smile was tired but genuine. "That's a deal." He pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers, and they stood that way for a long time while the fort settled into night around them. The next 2 weeks passed with increasing impatience on Naichi's part and steady healing on Wade's. His wound closed completely, the fresh pink scar, a reminder of how close he'd come to dying, but no longer a limitation. He regained strength through labor around the fort. Naichi spent her time preparing for departure, gathering supplies they'd need, making lists of routes and water sources, planning their journey in meticulous detail. Pike and his men remained in the stockade awaiting trial. Naichi saw them occasionally from a distance, noted the way Pike watched her whenever their paths crossed. His hatred was palpable even across yards of empty ground. She mentioned it to Thornton during one of their conversations on the ramparts. He'll come after us eventually, after prison, after whatever sentence he serves. Men like that don't forget. Thornton nodded slowly. Probably, but territorial judges aren't known for leniency toward men who run protection rackets. Pike's looking at 10 years minimum, maybe 15. That's a long time. People change. Or hatred festers. Also possible. They sat quiet for a minute. For what it's worth, Thornton said eventually, I think you're making the right choice. Leaving, building something away from all this. The day of the trial arrived with all the ceremony military justice could muster. The fort's chapel was converted into a makeshift courtroom, the territorial judge presiding from a raised platform. Soldiers filled the benches. Civilians from nearby settlements came to watch justice dispensed. Nietzsche and Wade sat near the front call as primary witnesses. They'd rehearsed their testimony with the Army lawyers, knew what questions to expect, understood their role. Wade went first, speaking in clear, measured tones about Pike's attempted theft of his horse, the knife fight that followed the pursuit across open country. His account was factual, unemotional. Then it was Nietzsche's turn. She stood at the witness position, conscious of every eye on her, of being Apache, in a room full of white soldiers and civilians. The prosecutor walked her through, finding Wade wounded through Pike's return, with more men through the confrontation that ended with her shooting 2 of Pike's gang. She answered each question, precisely offering no more information than requested. Pike's defense lawyer tried to make her sound like the aggressor implied she'd attacked unprovoked. But the evidence was too strong. Wade's wound too visible, the pattern of Pike's behavior across the territory too well established. The trial lasted 3 days. Witness after witness described Pike's protection racket, the violence he'd used, the lives he'd ruined. By the end, even Pike's lawyer seemed to be going through the motions. The verdict came swiftly, guilty on all counts. The sentence followed 15 years hard labor in the territorial prison, his men receiving between 5 and 10 years. Pike's face went white with fury when the judge pronounced sentence. He lurched to his feet, hands still bound, and pointed directly at Nietzsche and Wade. This isn't over. You hear me? You think 15 years changes anything? I'll find you. Both of you. Guards wrestled him back into his seat, silenced him with threats of additional charges. But the damage was done. His words hung in the air, a promise everyone heard. Wade's hand found Nietzsche's under the bench, squeezed once. She squeezed back. We knew this would happen. We'll deal with it when we have to. Until then, we live. The court adjourned. Prisoners were led away. The crowd dispersed in low conversations. Nietzsche and Wade slipped out through a side door, heading straight for their cabin to finish preparations for departure. They'd stayed for the trial as promised. Now they were free to leave, to disappear into country they knew, and the Army didn't. They left at dawn the next morning, riding west on horses the fort provided as partial compensation for their testimony. Thornton saw them off personally, shaking hands with Wade and offering Nietzsche a nod of respect. Good luck, both of you. I hope you find what you're looking for. We will, Wade said with certainty Nietzsche almost believed. Then they were through the gate and into open country, the fort falling away behind them. Nietzsche felt her chest expand with each mile of distance, felt the walls she'd been living within finally crumble. Beside her, Wade rode with increasing confidence, his body fully healed now. He caught her looking and smiled, the expression carrying warmth and promise, and the particular joy of someone who'd found something worth keeping. They had a long journey ahead. 40 miles to the canyon, maybe more, across country that held its own dangers. But they were together, free, alive, despite all odds. And ahead, somewhere in the high mountains, a place waited with painted walls and flowing water, and room enough to build the life they'd promised each other. The sun climbed higher. The land opened before them. And Nietzsche let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe they'd actually make it, that maybe survival could transform into something more, something that looked like hope. Behind them, the fort disappeared into distance and memory. Ahead, the future waited with all its possibilities. They rode toward it together, and that was enough. The journey west took 4 days. Not because of pursuit or danger, but because they chose to move slowly, deliberately, as if reluctant to let the journey end. Each night, they made camp in places that felt significant, talking in ways they hadn't before. Wade told her about his childhood on a Texas ranch, about a father who'd taught him to read the land, and a mother who died when he was 12. About Daniel, always Daniel, whose memory now felt less like an anchor and more like a reminder of what mattered. Naichi shared pieces of her own history in return. The band she'd belonged to, the seasonal migrations, the stories embedded in every canyon and peak. Her marriage to a man who'd been gentle and brave, whose name she rarely spoke because speaking it hurt too much. The raid that had shattered everything. Until now, Wade said after she'd finished one particularly difficult story, you belong to something now. Do I? You belong to yourself and maybe a little to me, if you'll have it. She looked at him across the fire. Maybe a little, she conceded, and his smile made the admission worth the vulnerability. On the fourth day, they climbed into true high country, following a trail only Naichi remembered. The air thin turned sharp with the smell of pine and snow that would come soon. They passed through groves of aspen that shimmered gold in the afternoon light. The canyon revealed itself gradually. First, the narrowing of the valley they'd been following, walls rising in stepped layers of red and cream sandstone. Then the sound of water, clear and musical. Finally, the entrance itself, a cleft barely wide enough for the horses to pass single file, hidden from casual observation. Nightshade led them through Wade, following both silent, as the passage opened into something that took the breath, a hidden valley, maybe a quarter-mile across, ringed by stone walls, that rose 200 feet on three sides. The fourth side climbed gradually toward the mountains proper, forested with pine and spruce. At the valley's heart, water bubbled from multiple springs and gathered into a clear pool before flowing down through the cleft. The grass around the pool was thick and green. Cottonwoods clustered in golden stands, and on the walls, exactly as Naichi remembered, the painted figures. Humans and animals, spirals, and geometric patterns, stories recorded in ochre and charcoal, in white clay by hands dead for centuries. Watching, witnessing, giving silent blessing to whoever found this place and chose to claim it. Wade had stopped his horse, was simply staring. She waited, letting him absorb it. It's perfect, he said finally, his voice carrying something like awe. It's exactly what you described and more. Yes, we're really going to live here. If you want to. He turned to look at her, his eyes intense. I want to. God help me, I can't imagine wanting to be anywhere else. They dismounted and led the horses to the pool. The valley was sheltered enough that snow would be manageable in winter, protected from the worst winds. Game sign was everywhere. Near the eastern wall, set back in a natural alcove, they found the remains of old structures. Stone foundations and fire-blackened rocks that marked where previous occupants had made shelter. Apache, probably from the way the stones were arranged. Wade ran his hand along one of the foundation stones. We'll build here. Use what they started. Honor what came before while making it ours. Naichi felt something tight in her chest loosen. That he understood the importance of continuity, of building on what others had begun. It spoke to something fundamental about who he was. They spent the rest of that day exploring, mapping the valley in their minds, planning. The work ahead was enormous, constructing shelter. Before winter, gathering and preserving food, establishing all the infrastructure of permanent habitation. But standing in that hidden canyon with Wade beside her and the painted ancestors watching from the walls, Naichi felt capable of any challenge. They made camp that first night near the springs, too excited to sleep much, talking through plans and possibilities until the stars wheeled overhead. Naichi fell asleep listening to the water and Wade's breathing and the silence that spoke of safety rather than isolation. They worked for 3 weeks straight, dawn to dusk. Wade proved surprisingly skilled at construction, his ranch background giving him knowledge that complemented Naichi's understanding of materials and methods her people had used. They built a single-room cabin against the eastern wall, using the natural alcove to provide one solid side while constructing the other 3 from pine logs. The roof was layers of bark and sod insulated to hold warmth. A stone chimney rose at one end, its design borrowed from both Apache and settler traditions. Inside, they built sleeping platforms on opposite sides of the single room, maintaining some pretense of separation, even as their lives increasingly intertwined. A central fire pit provided heat and cooking. Shelves along the walls held their supplies, dried meat, preserved vegetables, herbs, for medicine tools. Around the cabin, they established the infrastructure of permanent settlement. A small corral for the horses. Storage caches dug into the hillside and lined with stone. A smokehouse near the springs. Naichi hunted while Wade built, bringing down deer and elk that they butchered together, saving every usable part. Nothing was wasted. They fell into rhythms that felt ancient and new simultaneously. Wake at dawn, work through morning, share a midday meal, return to separate tasks until evening. Eat together as night fell, reviewing what had been accomplished and planning tomorrow's work. Sleep exhausted and wake to do it again. It should have been brutal, should have worn them down. But instead, Naichi found herself growing stronger, more grounded, as if the work was feeding something that had been starving for 3 years. Wade seemed to feel it too, his movements becoming more confident, his face losing the haunted quality. They were building more than just shelter. They were building a life, and the distinction mattered. One evening in the fourth week, Naichi returned from hunting to find Wade standing before the eastern wall, studying the pictographs with intense focus. "I've been trying to understand them," and he said, without turning. "The symbols, what they mean. Some are obvious, the hunters, the animals, the cycles of seasons. Others are more personal, messages for those who came after." "What do they say?" Naichi moved closer, tracing one set of figures with her finger hovering just above the stone. "This one here, the spiral leading to the center, that's about journey, about how the path inward is the same as the path outward, just traveled in different directions. And this," Wade pointed to a grouping of human figures, hands joined encircling a central symbol. "Community, the idea that individuals alone are vulnerable, but together they're strong." Wade was quiet for a long moment. "I want to add to it, to the wall, not replace what's here, but continue it. Mark that we were here, that we built something, that we mattered." The request surprised Naichi with its thoughtfulness. That Wade wanted to honor it by adding to it spoke to a respect she appreciated deeply. "What would you add?" "I don't know yet. Something about what we found here. About two people who are alone learning to be together. About survival becoming something more." "Then we'll add it. When winter comes and outside work becomes impossible, we'll spend the time mixing paints and deciding what story to tell." Wade smiled. "Thank you. For what? For making this feel like ours. Not just yours or just mine, but something we're building together." Naichi felt warmth bloom in her chest. "That's what it is, what it's supposed to be." She took his hand and led him back to the cabin where dinner waited. The first snow came 6 weeks after their arrival, exactly as Naichi had predicted. Fat flakes that fell steadily through the night, accumulating to 8 inches before the storm passed. They woke to a valley transformed, everything softened and quieted by the white blanket. Wade stepped outside and simply stood turning in a slow circle. His Texas upbringing had given him heat and drought, not the particular beauty of snow in high country. "It's incredible," he said when Naichi joined him. "Makes everything feel new. Well, it's also cold and dangerous and will trap us here for months. But yes, it's beautiful too." They spent that day adjusting to their changed circumstances. The horses needed more feed. The cabin needed constant fire. Water had to be carried from the springs before ice formed. It was harder than the building had been, demanding different kinds of endurance. But they'd prepared well, and the valley provided what they needed. The springs never froze completely. The cabin held heat better than expected. They settled into winter routines, morning chores done quickly, long afternoons spent on indoor work, tanning hides, making tools, repairing equipment. Evenings by the fire talking or reading from the single book Wade had carried with him, a worn copy of Whitman's poems. Naichi had never learned to read beyond basic words. Wade offered to teach her, hesitant about implying criticism. She accepted without ego. They spent hours with letters scratched in dirt or charcoal on flat stones, Wade patient, as she struggled to connect sounds and symbols. Progress was slow but steady, and by midwinter she could sound out simple sentences from Wade's book. One evening she read aloud a passage that made Wade smile. "I think I could turn and live with animals. They are so placid and self-contained." She stumbled over self-contained, but got the sense right. Wade nodded approval. "That's good. Really good." These words, this Whitman, he understood something about simplicity, about how complicated civilization makes what should be simple. He did. Daniel loved that about him. They sat quiet for a while, watching the fire. Then Wade rose and crossed the cabin, settling beside her on her sleeping platform, instead of returning to his own. "Is this all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes." He put his arm around her shoulders. They sat that way for a long time, watching the fire burn down, neither needing to say anything more. When Naichi finally fell asleep, it was leaning against Wade's chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. She woke in the night to find they'd shifted in sleep now, lying together, Wade's arms around her. For a moment, panic flared, too close, too vulnerable, too much like the intimacy she'd shared with her husband and lost. But Wade's breathing was peaceful, his hold gentle, and gradually the panic faded. This wasn't her husband, wasn't trying to replace what she'd lost, was something new and different and maybe equally valuable. She let herself relax back into sleep, held safe in the darkness, and when morning came, neither of them mentioned the shift that had occurred. They simply continued sleeping beside each other from that night forward. Winter deepened. The snow accumulated to 3 feet in the valley bottom. They were truly isolated now, cut off from the outside world, as completely as if they had been transported to another planet. The only sounds were wind and water and the occasional call of ravens. In that isolation, they found unexpected peace. Without external pressures, without the weight of Pike's pursuit or the Army's expectations, they could simply be, could learn each other's rhythms and preferences, could discover what it meant to share space and life with another person without agenda or pretense. By midwinter, they'd achieved something that felt like genuine partnership. Not the desperate alliance of survival, but the deeper bond that came from choosing each other day after day when no external force required it. One evening in February, during a storm that howled around the cabin, Wade looked up from the hide he was working and spoke suddenly. "Marry me." Naichi's hand stilled. She looked at him, trying to gauge whether he was serious. "What? Marry me? Not legally, not with some ceremony that needs witnesses and documents, but here between us. A promise that this is permanent, that we're building something meant to last beyond winter or convenience." Her heart was beating too fast. "Wade, you don't have to answer now. Think about it. But I needed to say it, needed you to know that's what I want. Not just for now, but for whatever comes after." He returned to his work, leaving Naichi to process in silence. She tried to focus on sharpening, but kept missing the angle. Marriage, partnership legally recognized and socially sanctioned. She'd had that once, had lost it, had assumed she'd never want it again because wanting meant vulnerability, and vulnerability led to loss. But Wade wasn't asking for legal recognition, was asking for something simpler and maybe more profound acknowledgement that what they'd built mattered enough to claim it explicitly. She set down her tools and moved to where he sat, knelt so they were eye level, took his hands in hers. "Yes." Wade's eyes widened. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you here in this valley with the ancestors as witnesses. I'll promise you permanence and partnership and everything that comes with choosing to share a life." His smile was brilliant. When spring comes, when the valley wakes up and we can stand by the springs where water flows clear and make promises to each other that match the season. That's 3 months away. Then you have 3 months to be sure this is what you want. Wade cupped her face in his hands. "I've never been more sure of anything. But I'll wait. For you, I'll wait forever if that's what you need." He kissed her, then slow and careful. She answered by pulling him closer, deepening the kiss, letting go of the last protective wall she'd maintained between them. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I love you. Should have said it first, but I'm saying it now. I love you, and I want to spend whatever life we have together." Naichi felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too. Didn't think I could again after losing him, but apparently the heart doesn't work that way." No, it doesn't. They held each other while the storm raged outside and the fire burned low. Married, partners in every sense. Building not just shelter, but a life that honored what they'd survived to reach this moment. The rest of winter passed in that glow. They began planning the ceremony, decided they'd each speak vows of their own creation, agreed that they'd paint their union on the canyon wall, chose simple rings carved from elk antler. In March, the weather began to break. The deep snow started melting. The springs flowed stronger. The first birds returned their calls, announcing that survival had won another round. They spent April preparing for the ceremony and for spring planting. Breaking ground in the meadow near the springs, creating garden plots where they'd plant beans and squash and corn. And they worked on the wall painting, mixing colors from minerals and plants, sketching designs in charcoal before committing to permanent pigment. Wade proved surprisingly skilled. Naichi provided knowledge of traditional methods and symbols. They painted themselves as two figures walking toward a common center, the hands outstretched but not yet touching. Around them, symbols of the journey: mountains for obstacles, overcome water for life, sustained fire for warmth shared. Above, stars in the same patterns that had watched over them during their flight from Pike. It was simple, beautiful in its simplicity, a story told in images that would outlast them. On the first day of May, when wildflowers bloomed in impossible profusion across the meadow and the air smelled of growth and possibility, they held their ceremony. No witnesses except the valley itself. The painted ancestors, the spirits, Naichi's grandmother had promised lived in places like this. They stood beside the springs, water flowing clear and cold over ancient rock. Wade spoke first. "I promise to stand with you through whatever comes, to share work and rest, burden and joy in equal measure, to honor what you've survived and what we're building together, to choose you every day for as long as we both draw breath." Then Naichi, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "I promise to trust you with my heart, even though trust terrifies me, to build a life that honors both our pasts while creating something new, to fight beside you, laugh with you, grieve with you when grief comes, to choose partnership over solitude, love over safety always." They exchanged the elk antler rings, simple bands that slipped onto fingers calloused from work, kissed while the spring sang and the sun warmed them. It was done. They were married in the only way that mattered, by choice and commitment. That night, they celebrated with a feast of fresh meat and the last of the coffee from Fort Bayard, talking late about the future that stretched before them. Children, maybe, if such things were possible. Expanding the cabin, building community if others ever found this valley and proved trustworthy. Dreams built on foundation of survival, but reaching towards something richer. Naichi fell asleep that night, not just content, but happy, a state she'd stopped believing was possible. Summer came full and rich, the valley exploding with life. The garden produced beyond their needs. The springs ran constant and cool. Everything they'd hoped for materialized into reality. One morning in October, Naichi woke to discover she'd missed her monthly bleeding for the second time. She lay still, calculating dates and symptoms. The truth settled over her with quiet certainty: she was pregnant. For a long moment, she simply lay there processing. Fear, yes, of childbirth in the wilderness without medical help, but also something warmer. Hope, the possibility of family beyond just the two of them. Legacy in flesh rather than just paint on stone. Wade stirred beside her, saw her expression, and came immediately alert. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, I think. Maybe." "That's reassuring." Naichi sat up, took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. "I'm pregnant, maybe 2 months." Wade froze, his eyes going wide with shock that transformed rapidly into something like joy. "You're sure?" "Not completely, but all the signs are there. We're going to have a child." "Looks like it." He pulled her into an embrace that was equal parts wonder and terror. "I don't know how to be a father." "Neither do I, but we'll figure it out together, same as everything else." They spent the winter preparing, expanding the cabin as Wade had suggested, gathering in supplies on a trip to Fort Bayard. Thornton helped them acquire what they needed, asked no awkward questions. "You two planning to expand your family?" he asked with a knowing smile. "Maybe," Naichi admitted. "Then congratulations. Raise them right." "We will." Spring came again, their second in the valley, and Naichi's belly swelled, the baby growing inside her, making its presence known through kicks and movement that fascinated Wade. Labor came on a hot day in June. Wade went white when she told him, panic returning despite months of preparation. "It's happening, now. What do I do?" "You breathe, then you boil water and get the supplies ready. Then you help me through this because I can't do it alone." He nodded, moving into action. And when the real pain started, he held her hand and wiped her face and told her she was strong, that she could do this, that he believed in her. The baby came screaming into the world just before sunset, a girl with a healthy set of lungs and Wade's dark hair. Naichi held her while Wade cut the cord with hands that shook, both of them crying and laughing and staring at this impossible thing they'd created together. "She needs a name," Wade said after a long silence. Naichi looked at the small face, seeing neither herself nor Wade, but something new and separate, a future that hadn't existed before this moment. Sarah, she said, after your mother. Wade's face crumpled, emotion overwhelming him. He nodded wordlessly, unable to speak around the tears. They sat together through the night, taking turns holding their daughter, marveling at tiny fingers and perfect features in the miracle of new life, born in a hidden valley where only two people had lived before. The years that followed were filled with the particular challenges and joys of raising a child in isolation. Sarah learned to walk in the meadow by the springs, learned to speak in a mixture of English and Apache. Wade taught her to read using his worn copy of Whitman. Naichi taught her about plants and medicine, which roots cured what ailments. But mostly they taught her love. Taught her through example that family was choice as much as blood, that commitment meant staying through hard times. That the valley would always be hers, but only if she earned it through work and respect. Sarah grew into a woman strong and capable, inheriting the best of both her parents. Eventually she married, started her own family. Wade and Naichi watched their daughter begin. Her life felt time's passage in ways both beautiful and bittersweet. They were in their 60s when Wade's health began failing. Not dramatically, just the gradual decline of a body that had been pushed hard for too many years. One evening in autumn, Wade asked her to sit with him by the springs. I want to tell you something. I'm listening. I'm dying. Not tomorrow, probably not next year, but soon enough that we should talk about it. Naichi's throat closed. She'd known, of course, but hearing him say it made it real. How long? Maybe 2 years, maybe less if winter's hard. And you're accepting this. Usazes. I'm 63, lived longer than I expected and better than I deserved. Spent the last 30 years with you building something that matters. I don't have regrets, Naichi. I have gratitude that it lasted as long as it did. She wanted to rage against the unfairness, but she'd learned through loss before that death didn't negotiate. I'm not ready to lose you. I know I'm not ready to go, but ready or not, it's coming. So I need you to promise me something. What? That you'll keep living after I'm gone. Not just surviving, but actually living. Keep telling Sarah stories about us. Don't turn the valley into a shrine. Let it grow and change and become whatever it needs to be next. Naichi's vision blurred with tears. That's asking a lot. I know, but you're strong enough. You've always been strong enough. They sat beside the springs while darkness gathered, holding hands like they had through 30 years of joy and struggle. The water ran its constant course, speaking of continuity beyond individual lives. Wade lasted 18 months, long enough to see another grandchild born, long enough to tell Sarah everything he wanted her to know about the valley's history. Long enough to make peace with the life he'd lived and the death approaching. He died on a spring morning, Naichi holding his hand, Sarah reading from the worn copy of Whitman. His last words were "thank you," spoken soft and certain, the gratitude clear even as breath failed. They buried him in the meadow where they'd married, marked his grave with a stone carved with his name and dates and the simple phrase, "He built love from ruins." Naichi grieved with the intensity of someone who'd loved deeply and completely. Sarah stayed close, brought the grandchildren to distract and comfort. But eventually, slowly, Naichi found her way back to living. Found that Wade had been right, she was strong enough to continue. And she painted. Added to the wall one final time, this section showing two figures merged into one, then separating as one ascended to stars while the other remained on earth. Not sad exactly, more like completion. The end of a story that had been told fully, without regret. She lived another 10 years, long enough to see the community truly flourish. Long enough to teach her grandchildren the stories she'd learned from her grandmother. Long enough to paint one final section on the wall, a single figure, walking toward the ascending stars, joining the one who'd gone before. She died quietly in her sleep at 73, Sarah finding her in the morning, looking peaceful. They buried her beside Wade, marked her grave with matching stone. She transformed survival into life. The valley continued after them. Sarah led it wisely, her children inheriting responsibility in their turn. The painted wall accumulated new sections, each generation adding their piece. 100 years later, 200, 500, the valley was still there. The cabin had been replaced multiple times, the springs still flowed. The community that surrounded it had grown and shrunk and evolved. But the wall remained preserved carefully, telling its story to anyone willing to listen. The tale of two people who found each other, broken and built something whole. Who chose love over safety, partnership over solitude, who survived everything the world threw at them, and created legacy that outlasted their lives. Their names were remembered. Their story was told and retold, embellished and mythologized. But the core truth remained that Nietzsche and Wade had lived, had loved, had mattered. And in a hidden valley in the mountains of New Mexico, the painted walls remembered everything, witnesses to a story that had started with survival and ended with something infinitely richer. The story of a life built from ruins. The story of two people who refused to let the world's violence define them. The story of home earned through struggle and maintained through love. The story that would never truly end because it lived on in every person who found sanctuary in that valley, in every child who learned the old tales, in every couple who chose partnership despite risk. Nietzsche and Wade's legacy wasn't just the valley or the community or the painted walls. It was the simple, profound truth that even in a world of violence and loss, love could be built. Family could be chosen. Home could be created from nothing but determination and hope, and the willingness to stand together against whatever came. And that truth, more than anything else, was worth preserving, worth passing down, worth telling again and again until the words themselves became history carved into more than just stone.